Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of StarCraft History Weekly, where we go over StarCraft 2 and StarCraft Brood War and talk about all the things that were happening back in the good old days. And we do it just by watching a VOD and then coming up with whatever comes to my mind. So far, it seems like there is some good reception for episode 1, so we're just going to stick with this format. I am going to spend today going over specifically really just GSL Season 1, the entirety of it. Obviously not going through every single match because it's an insane amount of matches, but going over some of the key players as well as discussing some of the meta at the time, some key differences between Legacy of the Void and Wings of Liberty, and then finally finishing with the finals of GSL Season 1, and who ended up being our first champion of StarCraft 2. So while going through this, I did find, first and foremost, a really great name to certainly discuss in depth later on, but we do have NesTea, who would go on to really be one of the first greats in StarCraft 2. In the grand context of 13 years of StarCraft 2, perhaps his reign of dominance was quite short, but make no mistake, he was definitely dominant for a little while, and for a little while was also Artosis' favorite player. But let's hear them introduce him, so let's go.
This is NesTea, and guess who that is? That is a former pro gamer. I believe it's Zerg.
It's Zerg.
Yeah. I didn't know that his ID was actually NesTea. I played NesTea. I think I may have, in fact, bad-mannered NesTea when he killed me.
Well, I'm pretty sure anybody that's beaten you on the internet has done that.
Of course.
But NesTea, Zerg, I like that name. He's
So, yeah, Artosis was playing a lot and actually was quite competitive. You'll see him later on in GSL Season 1, in fact, playing Protoss. He was still trying to be a pro and then was also doing casting on the side and eventually just became a full-time commentator. But they recognized him because in Brood War, he was a 2v2 player, actually. 2v2 was, for a time, actually quite a popular mode, but also actually competitive. Eventually, they did get rid of Brood War 2v2, but for a little while, it was actually kind of a thing. I believe Zerg was really strong, and NesTea was kind of a dedicated 2v2 guy, named something different in the past. When it came to StarCraft 2, apparently the story from him says that he actually just looked around on his desk and saw a NesTea can and then named himself NesTea. So that, yeah, that's actually as basic as it is. Some interesting things about him is that he was actually kind of old already, even for when he was playing in Brood War. So I had to do the math and look up his age. Currently he's 40, so 12 years ago he was 28 or 13, 27. So in Brood War, let's say he was like 24, 25 or something along those lines. Just bear with me on the numbers. That was still old, okay? Like Brood War really had young man games notoriety. Not only did they expect you to be insanely fast, which was kind of often attributed to very young players who had healthy wrists, but also you had to dedicate your entire life to it. So you were sleeping with in a team house with all of your teammates, and you were living and breathing Brood War. You were going to meetings. If you did work out, it was in the context of stretching and just keeping healthy for the context of playing the game. It wasn't really a whole lot of time to do other things like, have a family or like a work-life balance. Forget about it. So NesTea was already kind of considered old back then. And then he starts off his StarCraft 2 career again, kind of old. So 27, and I'm already over 30. So keep in mind that old is context-based. But it definitely was old considering what people's expectations still were for an RTS or an esport in general. Certainly has changed in the last decade even. It pretty much, NesTea I think is one of the shining examples early on in what we call like kind of the big wave of esports, the international wave of esports with the development of Twitch and all that. That really proved that you didn't have to be literally, 16 when you started playing professionally, which means you had to be 12 when you started playing pretty well. Like Baby, now named TY, or Maru, who still looks very young, but also started very young. NesTea kind of came in and proved that you didn't need maybe the fastest hands to still be good at the game, and then you didn't also need to be, I guess, like, so solely dedicated to StarCraft that you couldn't have anything else. I believe he was married and started a family eventually, but I think he was married for a lot of his pro gaming career. So that was a really cool thing about him. Now, if he was just another, round of 64, no one really cared kind of guy, then no one cares. But the thing is that he eventually would go on to again be one of the most powerful players in StarCraft 2's history. To give you an idea, I believe he is still the only player to not drop a map in GSL on his road to victory, where he did 4-0, I believe, Inca, who just tried to DT rush him all the time. But he literally didn't drop a map that season against all types of good players and all types of matchups. That was just how good he was at one period of time, or perhaps you could say how bad everyone else was. I mean, it's fair. But he was really cool, and I'm certain I'll be going into more of his story as we continue on. This is the first season of GSL, so you could hear that Taste and Artosis were kind of just making some idle conversation. A couple of seasons from now, probably within the year of this first broadcast of NesTea, Artosis would probably be fangirling over him constantly. It happened pretty quickly when it did happen. So I wanted to point him out, so we'll definitely be talking more about him. I think throughout some of these other VODs, gotta make sure to mute it. For some of these other VODs, we do have the likes of Artosis actually playing in the GSL. Like I said, he eventually just stopped trying to be a pro gamer. Never stopped being competitive, of course, but his focus did then turn into casting, which, I mean, just makes a lot of sense. Artosis was also considered kind of old when he was still trying to make Brood War work, and certainly one of the older members of the scene, and just never quite broke through that barrier that some of the other foreigners did, such as Idra, who was breaking through a barrier when it came to Brood War, and then, of course, came into StarCraft 2 as one of the expected winners of the tournaments, of whatever tournament he joined. And it was just really cool that it was so exciting that, we didn't just have the people who took that chance getting into Brood War still in Korea, now participating in GSL like Idra was, but you also had a lot of the fresh names of StarCraft 2 also decide that going over to Korea to participate in the GSL was a good use of their time. So certainly talk more about the foreign hopes in GSL and the developing foreign hopes just kind of in general. But you can see as we go through some of these other VODs or into the round of 16 that they're even still experimenting with the setup. Again, apparently GSL was happening, a season was every single month. And they cast all of the matches apparently from the round of 64. Now, it can't possibly be all the matches, but they cast a crazy amount of matches all the way back to round of 64. So that was also taking a real toll on Tasteless's voice, which we'll get into when we get into the finals. Also, one thing I did notice about some of the previous the observing of some of these games is crazy bad. I think this is actually the VOD that I had showed in the last episode. It was with Idra, who would go on to be certainly one of the big favorites and foreign hopes of the scene. His mechanics coming into Brood War it wasn't unmatched. It was matched by other people coming from Brood War, but they were very good. So you go over the default UI again. Some things I didn't even pick up on when I was first watching it in the last episode was that there was no timer. I forgot they had to include a timer, and make no mistake, I will absolutely be talking about game time and why it's an important thing to talk about in this video. But they didn't have game time in, and you can see that they are only showing the units tab in this particular video. I talked about how there was an idea that not having the production tab open was actually a way to make it very exciting and was very much in line with what they had in Brood War. And then just in general, just the default overlay, which I can take rid of my camera, and you can see that they can't even get rid of the viewer bar. So very limited in its visuals. But I didn't realize how bad the observing was until I went through this. It's crazy bad, you guys. I don't even know what's happening. I think there might be some mechanical difficulties, like broadcast difficulties happening, because occasionally, let's watch the first Reaper. This is where I really noticed it was terrible. Let's hear it.
He's actually, okay, he's going to attack here now. Now, note, mobility is what's important here. The Zerg units are faster on creep. That's why Idra put a creep tomb over here. He needs to get creep over to this location. Notice how slow the Queen is on low ground.
They are talking about Reaper action in the natural, and we are stuck not only watching an area that has no action whatsoever, but with the cursor over the tooltip, so we just have this lovely little thing blocking whatever vision of nothing we currently have. I actually cannot believe how bad this was. And it doesn't get any better. If we continue on, there's moments where, again, Tasteless and Artosis are talking about something really important, and then we're just watching this.
There's the 1 barracks into command center. You just harass with Reapers a bit. There's the 3 barracks, a little bit harder harass with Reapers in the command center. There's the 5 barracks, really late command center, which we saw Moro do a lot out.
I had to double check myself to make sure that I wasn't in a replay, which is impossible, by the way. You can't open up these replays anymore. And that I wasn't the observer, you know, that I wasn't being the fool here, because this is just so bad. So bad. And this would stay this way for a couple of the earlier videos. But it's also kind of amazing because they really did improve very quickly. If we are thinking of this all coming in the context of a month, from the round of 64 to the round of 32 to the round of 16 now, I think we already can see some differences. So that includes, you know, Tasteless and Artosis' different place. They now are donning that get-up that I said is going to be very popular. So the blazer over the t-shirts. And then they have like map introductions so we can see what they are. Delta Quadrant, Lost Temple, Kulas Ravine. Good times, guys. And then I think even the overlay eventually started to get better. This does feel like at least the actual resolution is better. I don't know about you guys, but this actually looks a lot cleaner, maybe because I haven't full screened it, but it still already does. And then we get into the final, the round of 8 leading up to those finals. And I think we just continue to see improvements on the UI as well as the setup for going into the matches. You can see this is the round of 8, and there's a lot of really good names here. Inca, I mentioned earlier, who would be very famous for DTing and DTing and DTing and DTing. Maka Prime, who was the developer of the Maka racks. And then HopeTorture actually named Rainbow. Later on, he just changed his name to something. It's bizarre. And then Fruitdealer. And we will certainly talk about Fruitdealer after just going over maybe some of the meta, and then again, some of the improvements that they're already making in the actual production quality. So here we go, maybe weeks, maybe upwards to a month after that first video that I showed, we have a timer. Now, it's not in the location you might recognize, but we have a timer. Amazing. And then I think also we have the actual production being set up. We again have some actual player cams. They experimented with some caster cams as well. They're using the different tabs just because they can show it off now, so they can just show the APM tab, which, oh boy, APM was a real honest to goodness discussion that was had frequently back in the day. I think right now, the past few years, I haven't heard anyone really bring up APM for pros. I haven't really heard anyone bring APM up to each other. Everyone knows that it's not really indicative of speed or skill or efficiency, first and foremost. So, but back then it was a huge deal, and it was really cool to see it that they're so damn fast, right? You can see they have a production tab, and the production tab at one point had no timers on it, so you didn't have a bar under it. Now they have a bar, and it looks like our production tab nowadays. Yay! It looks so nice, kind of. We're still on the default overlay, but we can tell what time it is. So we can take a look at, for instance, right now, the TVT that's going on, and perhaps what meta we would have found ourselves in 2010, first GSL season on the beautiful map that is Scrap Station. And what the meta is for a TVT. Now, Scrap Station is a beautiful map, gorgeous. You can go into the custom lobbies and create this map if you ever want to notice, like really get in there and just see how terrible it was. But you could also try and follow along here. So there's an island base, and people would try to take it, 100%. Terran a little more favored because, you know, you can lift their command center. And then there is a bridge through here that was blocked by rocks, I believe. So if you were rushing, you had to kill rocks. But it was very helpful for Terran pushes, for instance, because they'd kill rocks while building up and then push into the Zerg. Zelnagas on the bottom, I believe that was a gold base at the very bottom of the map. And then this is the actual trajectory for your attack actually went all the way down here. So, you know, it might have actually been one of the longer rush distances, probably still not all that long. And it used to be I would call this a U-shaped map, which occasionally makes itself known again in the map pool. But I also would say that we would far more commonly call this type of map or positions in general close by air, which is a phrase we don't really use anymore because, one, maps don't generally get close to each other anymore base-wise. And then two, we no longer have 4-player or 3-player maps where people could spawn wherever they wanted. So having a designated terminology for when they spawn like horizontal to each other and saying, okay, that's close by air, wouldn't just be a quick way of saying spawn bottom left, spawn bottom right. It would also imply that air units would be perhaps more effective. And on some maps, that was certainly true. It might sway one person, one style or another, if it was close by air versus close by ground or just diagonal to each other. Anywho, let's check out what the hell is happening in this game. The TvT, or something on one base, not so different so far. TvT is certainly one of the matchups that has stayed fairly consistent. Mech has come and gone as far as the favored style of play. In fact, Heart of the Swarm, I would say, had a lot of mech games, and I think Wings of Liberty and Heart of the Swarm went through a decent amount of Bioverse mech games too. In the last 6 years or so, Legacy of the Void, it's pretty much like 80% bio versus bio. So there is that, but you can see that it's kind of similar. The 1-1-1 on one base is still kind of where you go. I mean, factory expand more so than that. What I don't think you see very often is one base starport double pumped Vikings in a bunker. Usually if you saw this in a game of today's StarCraft, you would assume they're cheesing you. But I don't know if that's the case here. Raven would have been very different back in the day, as we saw that on the way. It would have had different spells, would have cost something different, would have had a different build time as well. And you can see that apparently this one drop, excuse me? Oh, okay, I see what he did. He dropped the tank and the Marines, then he just flew the Vikings over. All right, I'll give him credit for that. That's kind of cool on a close by air spawn. So this would again be where you would discuss being close by air might encourage this type of build. So that's actually kind of cool. TvT, probably the most stable matchup. If we were to say, if you were to ask 13 years what matchup has changed the least, I guess I think I would say TvT, but DVZ might be a contender. Sling rushes into Roach. PvP has drastically changed, so you can't say that at all. Yes, amazing. Or another amazing map, Metalopolis. There's another map called Metropolis, and I always have to double take for this one. Metropolis is a very big, much bigger map, but they both had a similar background, texture, terrain. What do you call it? Like theme? I don't know. So, anyways, but this was a 4-player map, and you could see that they could spawn in these quadrants. Or if you were to hit your opponent in these matchup, these spawns, 6 o'clock and 3 o'clock, and you would use more often back in the day clock terminology, because you would have bases that were in bottom right, top left, which is so common nowadays. Anyways, you would call this close by ground. Their ramps exit here, and then they go right toward each other. I mean, this rush distance was probably 15 seconds. That's crazy. But then there was an equal chance that you would spawn diagonal, which would encourage more macro play, and as well as a chance that you would spawn in this map more horizontal, I guess you could say. And it would be close by air. So again, it might encourage some more drop play. In this case, you would be most concerned about them just literally coming across the map and rushing you. So back in the day, you would have 4- and 3-player maps where you just did not know where your opponent spawned, and Protoss got the worst end of the stick for that one. They just would be cheesed and not know it's on the way, all right? So that's one of the biggest reasons we stopped including that. Eventually, we also started having 4-player maps where you would basically take away the options of spawning in the more abusive positions. You would force them into diagonal, basically. And then we even had a map where they didn't just force you to spawn diagonal, but the Star Station used to be full of 4 bases, like 4-player map. And then certain time period or certain tournaments, they snipped them. They just like snipped the other diagonal, so it looked like a new map, but it was just the old map with some cuts made to it. So that was fun times. This is still the TvT, and we see that proxying will still happen. In this case, Makarak's a hidden barracks coming out from Maka Prime, I guess. So it's not really so much a proxy as much as just like they don't know what you are doing. So that's kind of cool. Moving on. This is already 20 minutes, guys. We can try and see if we can get any other matchups and just quickly touch on what might have been the meta. So we have PvT. This is my go-to example of just how terrible Wings of Liberty was when it first started. On a map that I think I've also talked about. This isn't Tal'Darim. No, Tal'Darim happened later. What is this map again? There you go. I need to look. Steps of War. Oh, golly gee willikers. Steps of War. Also very short rush distance and only 2 players, as you can see there. So in PvT, it was very common to have a 1-base Protoss who gets a sentry, and then a 1-base Terran who 3-raxes. And then a lot of the game actually being capable of going past the 5-minute mark would come down to whether or not the sentry got a force field on this ramp. I mean, just not amazing StarCraft. I love this, though. Apparently, this guy he proxied a factory in the base because there's so much space in these mains, and no one was doing a diligent job of checking. And the audacity, I guess, was also a bit baffling. And then Protoss, I don't think were probe scouting and probe harassing as much as they would end up doing. The probe could have easily gotten back into this main of the Terran, for instance, and saw that there was no factory. No. This all was going to rely on him keeping the wall. But we can't get a good shot of it, but keeping the ramp. Yeah, here we go. Keeping this ramp covered so he could take advantage of the high ground for as long as possible. And then possibly a force field if he thought that he needed it. But it looks like Ensnare. Oh, no, I was going to say. No, here it is. Hong on. Okay. Yeah, the Protoss player was maybe trying to play a little greedy. I honestly don't recall. But just, couple Hellions and Marauders and Marines, and oh my god, panic, everything's going down the drain. Gameplay, guys, gameplay. I would love to get a PVZ if we can real quick, because that was, oh no, this is the actual finals. That's not gonna cut it. That's not gonna be good enough. Oh, maybe there wasn't a PVZ in the round of 8, actually. Maybe I already failed here. Gotta go back to the round of 16, because PVZ probably had the biggest difference, especially early on. It was so difficult. Absolutely. GSL season 1, 2010. There we go. It was really difficult for them to get an expansion because of the way the maps were designed. So initially in PVZ, you would have the Protoss go 1-base high ground. Actually, I can find an example of this in Wikipedia. Xel'Naga Caverns, one of the maps that most people know about, actually. One of the very first maps. Back in the day, the maps on Wikipedia would have a lot more description and also tips and tricks and all that type of stuff. Not anymore. But you can see here, this is evidence of history. This is how they would suggest that you wall in. And this would be versus Zerg. And this is on their main base, right? So this, it's as you would expect. It's not rocket science right here to wall off. But that means that they couldn't get their natural up, right? That was one of the reasons they had to high ground walls, because they had no idea to get their natural up. Because if you do look at the maps, the naturals are completely insane. If we can get a shot of the natural in this one, that would be helpful. So here we're so early on. Yeah, we are doing the high ground wall. Eventually what people would do, like Xel'Naga Caverns lasted long enough in the map pool that I remember the transfer from going high ground gateway into the cannon rush, Forge Fast Expand, that could also be a cannon rush. But Forge Fast Expand was actually happening in Brood War. And I guess it just took a while for the StarCraft 2 folk to kind of get all their ducks in a row and make it actually viable in StarCraft 2. But eventually, StarCraft 2 PvZ did rely heavily on the Forge Fast Expand, and that's exactly what it sounds like. You would get a pylon basically here. If we're looking at this map, you can see just there's no choke really in the natural, and map makers wouldn't get chokes in the natural for a while. There are so many map makers. All the tournaments had different maps as well. No one was really communicating, I think, in the intent, and it wasn't until WCS probably when every tournament became underneath a bigger umbrella that I think we really had uniform maps. across the tournaments, but that's for another day. So you can see this one. You're like, how the hell do you wall this off? You really don't. What you would do is you would get a pylon here, the forge first, a cannon up, and then your gateway inside of an X-core. And I think on this type of wall, you would diagonal wall, which means you're not fully walling. It's just that you can then force any lings that are rushing you to go into your mineral line. You got a cannon to help you, perhaps, if you place it correctly, and a zealot to pop out to help the probes as well. And that would basically do it. Same for Terrans. Terrans wouldn't really be going for huge supply depot wall-offs, even though they could. It obviously take longer. They were going for bunkers. So either a bunker out in the open like this, which would be better against Roach Rush because you could full SCV surround, but worse against Lings because the Lings could fully surround it. Or they put a bunker here where it'd be worse against Roach Rushes because the SCVs couldn't surround it, but then better against Ling Rushes because the Lings couldn't surround it. So that was a big choice you were making. All the way up to the map, like Daybreak, to be honest. We still had bunker being placed down over very proper scouting and control and supply depot walls for a long time. That wouldn't change, I guess. I don't remember when Daybreak came out, but after this map pool is for certain. So yeah, PVZ is definitely the biggest one to change. You can see a lot of 1 base into very slow 2 base. For a Zerg player, 2 base into very slow 3 bases. You might be looking at the time in some of these as well, and we can go ahead and skip to the finals, for instance, and we can see perhaps something that's happening in game. You can see the time now that they've implemented the timer, and you can say, wow, this is really fast. This is crazy fast. What's happening here? So, or crazy slow. I think it's actually what would happen is that you'd be like, this is crazy slow natural expand. I guess basically if you saw a 5-minute layer right now, you'd be like, oh, that's not the craziest. That's not crazy layer timing. Here we go. I got to do like a little snippet just to highlight this one because I love talking about it. It's the only thing to talk about if the game goes past 45 minutes. The timer is a lie compared to what you know about Legacy of the Void. Here's your history lesson, guys. In StarCraft 1, the developers initially planned on everything to play on normal. So if you played on normal, then it was 1, 2, 3. It was real time or close to it. But people played on faster. So normal was regular time, faster is faster time. That makes sense. When StarCraft 2 came out, I guess because of homage or just because no one bothered swapping, I'm not sure why they stuck with it, but they did stick with it. They kept that same time. It is basically on faster. So if you went into a custom lobby and you put on the normal speed, which is possible, you would have a more accurate time. So in Legacy of the Void, basically, the developers said, well, we're going to change it. And no one said anything in response because it was like, yeah, I guess we probably should. It was a neat little quirk you could explain to people, but it was also confusing because you'd have newbies start to plan out build orders and learn build orders. And maybe they'd use an actual clock at first. And they'd be like, So I think that was one of the reasons they finally got around to fixing it. But it's still not quite 1-to-1 as far as I know, but it's basically fixed nowadays. Legacy of the Void is more accurate, so it's a real time than the previous expansions as well as StarCraft 1. And so what that also means is that, of course, in typical StarCraft 2 Blizzard fashion, a bug was left over and never fixed. But it allows me to talk about this lovely quirk, right? The bug is that in Legacy of the Void, if you reach about 45 to 46 minutes, something around there, the hour marker will appear. So it'll be 0, 43, 16, or whatever it is. And that's because around that time was when old expansions was, that was the hour. That's why the hour marker pops up because it used to actually be an hour. But you can, again, it's like an hour is 43-ish minutes or something like that in Legacy of the Void, which again is like more real time. So yeah, it's not so much the context of the time that you have to look at to wonder how bizarre the builds that they're doing are. You'd have to look at, for instance, Fruitdealer is going into a 1 base layer effectively because his natural isn't done. So that's pretty fast, but you might say, oh, well, he's cheesing. He's Nidus Worm all-inning. He's fast muting. Not exactly. You wouldn't really call this a cheese, and because people were just staying on lower base counts. HopeTorture, lovely name, amazing name, is staying on 1 base so far, playing very protective with a high ground command center. That's what you did. So now that I've discussed that, said my amazing piece about the time, I do want to go ahead and highlight Fruitdealer. I'm trying to go by as quick as possible. We're already at 30 minutes, man. So Fruitdealer is actually a pretty big deal because he was not only the first winner of GSL, spoiler alert, guys, sorry about that, but he also was a Zerg player. Now, at the time of StarCraft releasing, people kind of pretty quickly identified that Zerg was underpowered versus Terran in particular. And Fruitdealer would barely make it past a lot of Terran players to get to the finals, in which he would once again face a Terran. Now, one of the ways that he did this, and I have to go find it, is that he didn't intentionally abuse a bug, I suppose, but he did, basically. I remember I actually upvoted this 6 years ago, because someone detailed about it. So here we go. So Top, who's a name you might still know about because he would still do streaming and whatnot, Fruitdealer faced Top in the round of 16 in the first GSL, and he barely won out, and it was because of an unintended bug. The splash damage from the Ultra didn't originate from the Ultralisk. It originated from the unit they were attacking. So the Thor that it was attacking would splash everything around it. And so there was a... There we go. VOD, please. Thank you, guys. Thank you, old Reddit. So you would see what should never happen, which is, you'll see in a second, like it's so many Thors going down to, a decent number of Ultras as my stuff breaks. But, it should never look like this. Thors weren't that different. Ultras weren't that different back in the day. But let's go ahead and watch this and see just how effective Ultras with not forward cone splash, but rather affecting whatever they're hitting and causing that to splash everything, did to Thors.
Here come the Ultras!
Can he do it though? Is it enough?
I think it might be. The splash damage of the Ultras doing 6 damage, and cool! Showing us Zerg. Just crushes through.
Oh my god.
You might have also noticed that those Thors had energy bars, and at one point Thors did have a spell, but more on that later. The Ultras were obviously bugged. Again, the Thors and Ultras were not that different, and it even looked like this might have been before chitinous plating. Like, this just was not... In the moment, you might just be excited because, oh my god, a Zerg surround, but it was a bug. So that was kind of a mark on his otherwise very fruitful GSL run, because people, even with this and even with that kind of souring of it, people still absolutely gave Fruitdealer correct credit in his advancement of the Zerg race. And you might, of course, be asking, keep on talking about how great this guy is. What did he do that was so great? Well, nowadays, not very much, to be honest. Someone actually did, some big fan of Fruitdealer actually did a breakdown of Fruitdealer on Team Liquid. Fruitdealer. I don't know, Team Liquid. That's all I got, man. And I wish I could find it. Maybe if I do, I'll put it in the links down below. But because if you asked me what made Fruitdealer so good, I actually wouldn't be able to tell you, because I was just getting into StarCraft at this point. I had not really, I certainly wasn't good, no doubt about that. But also, I couldn't really understand the context of it either, even if I was pretty good. And I think at the time I was playing Terran. I would only play Zerg for a year, and that was a little bit later. This isn't about me. The point is, if you do look up Fruitdealer in Wikipedia, oh, there it is. Oh, I think I found it. Analysis of Fruitdealer, why he's so good. I think this is it. Yeah, if you want to read it, by all means. I think it generally is true. I haven't gotten an expert panel to look at this and be like, yeah. But this was talking about, I believe, GSL Season 1 finals as well. So you can watch the video and go along with this guy's analysis if you wanted to. But basically what this boils down to is that Fruitdealer was good at what Zerg is now known for doing. So Zerg was always designated as the reactionary race. That's not something that was figured out. That was, I think, even a description of the race, I want to say, when it was first released. But, basically the idea of the push and pull that is a Zerg race. When they can fit in drones, when they have to make army, their ideal scenario is making as many drones as possible before ever making army. And no one would really push that limit until later on with like Rhett going to 100 drones, I suppose. So we're not quite there yet. But what Fruitdealer did well was that kind of push and pull. So he'd make harassing units, he'd make army, and then he'd use it very effectively to buy time and buy space for him to then make drones. So, and his control, I think, was a bit better than everyone else at that time as well. Even though mutas are easier to control in StarCraft 2 than Brood War, the mechanics of it are actually completely swapped. And mutas were a very big meta, very big deal and meta in early StarCraft 2. In Brood War, you had to trick them into clumping by hotkeying an Overlord or a Larva, and then they would actually clump on whatever you were targeting. In StarCraft 2, that's the default. They would clump on whatever you're targeting. In StarCraft 2, you have the magic box to keep them spread out. So it was something that was in development, is what I'm trying to say. So Fruitdealer was like, doing the appropriate stops that everyone was trying to copy, but he'd do it better. He'd read the timing of the drones better, and he'd read the such scenarios better. But you can see, if you want to get a good look at what the meta looks like, Fruitdealer's on 2 bases. He's taken what looks like a hidden expansion, but this was still leftover ideas from Brood War. In Brood War, Zerg players would take 2 bases at your normal locations, and then you take a third, basically on the, not the opposite side of the map, but another corner base. And then you would provide the pressure with mutas and then get into lurkers, and that would protect your ramp and so on and so forth. The idea, I think, was still being experimented with in StarCraft 2, and that's what Fruitdealer's doing here, with generally the idea being, if the Terran has to move another direction and take that time to do that, I can open up opportunities elsewhere. So the Terran goes, well, I'm going to kill this base, easy peasy, and then you counterattack, you run by, or you get ahead on the 2 bases that you do have, or something along those lines. Reason why, I think the biggest reason that I can immediately think of as to why this actually isn't a thing in StarCraft 2 is because creep spread is so paramount. So creep spread also was very abysmal back in the day. And certainly if you took a base this far to the right, you're not going to get creep spread over there. So people eventually figured this wasn't going to work. I don't think this was completely normal. I don't think everyone was copying the Brood War style, but I think that's what Fruitdealer was basically trying to do. He was at one point a Brood War player, different name, and then he actually changed his name to Fruitdealer because his dad got sick and he had to take over the fruit vendor stand with his mom. So he is literally a Fruitdealer, and that's the job he went back to as well after his pro gaming career. So anyways, he's pushing the envelope for Zerg. He's proving that maybe they're not an under-powered race, and he's going to upset a lot of expectations by taking the GSL finals against a Terran and a Terran-favored matchup with stuff like Muta control and fast infestors, which, if you don't remember, infestors were so much better back in the day. Good lord, I could do an entire episode about this, but I'll just say they had infested Terrans that got upgrades. Number 1, and the fungal both was instant and it completely rooted you. So there was no, spreading out even the slightest bit. And they did not have microbial shroud back then. That's they still had neural parasite, and that worked basically like it always has. So we see some sick moments in this game that I'll try and get to, man, where they're just like, oh my god, look at it, sick, and I'm just rolling my eyes, and I hope you do too. Let's watch this particular moment. Let's go ahead and see what the army going up the ramp can do here.
Meanwhile, the Marines stim rush towards this expansion. I don't know if Fruitdealer can save it in time.
Looks like he's going in the wrong direction and just targeting the hatch, maybe? Nope. And
you think you would have, but nope.
Just gonna go right through all this, but there's a lot of banelings coming in here with infestors. And bam!
Oh my god! He saves the expansion.
Beautiful moves by Fruitdealer.
Ultralisks, by the way, small counter.
Beautiful moves by Fruitdealer. It just, it was back then. If that happened in that way nowadays, we're very critical. Even with, if instant fungal was still a thing, we'd still be very critical of them not recognizing the scenario and abandoning ship, or at least trying to pre-spread or snipe the hatchery before they died. But this is the skill level. This is people learning from other people who are basically just learning from other people. No one was really there to say from the get-go, this is peak StarCraft 2. And you could always argue peak StarCraft 2 has never really occurred. But as much as you might think that Brood War could have given them a roadmap into what can and cannot be done with humans and RTS, StarCraft 2 was just so different that was an issue. There was also a conversation about whether or not all of these would-be Brood War pro gamers were just worse, because they never made it in Brood War, so they must be worse. And we'll talk later on about an article called The Elephant in the Room, which basically the idea was once Brood War pro gamers came over to StarCraft 2, they would dominate. Spoiler alert, that didn't really happen, but we'll talk about it later. So anyways, this was the skill of StarCraft 2. The highest skill level that StarCraft 2 could display was this finals at GSL, where Fruitdealer proved that Zerg was actually pretty good, and HopeTorture would just be made fun of because his name was HopeTorture. Rainbow was a okay name. I don't know why I changed it. And then Fruitdealer would win. Some other things I noticed about this was like all the excitement around it. People were definitely excited about StarCraft 2. It's just that so many Koreans were still going to be more partial to Brood War. So the crowd of the first event is, it's pretty cool. It's a lot of production and, people getting used to it. And we can also see just kind of like early 2000s, like styling and quality. Interviewing the players' mothers or parents in general, I guess, was way more popular. They'd invite them to sit front row and they'd ask them how proud of your boy and stuff. And occasionally you'll see some pros, mothers in the front row, and they'll say something to them. But it used to be a bigger deal. It used to be an actual content piece that they would provide. They had events going on where you could, give cheerfuls or just log in. And I guess I have yet even to discuss the fact that all of this was going to be seen on a player called the GOM-TV player. But again, only got so much time here, 41 minutes. But I think I can say that for now, that'll be it. We have witnessed the beginning of GSL Season 1 and the end of GSL Season 1. We can officially watch the ending as, yes, Fruitdealer does end up taking the series, I think, 4-1. And ending on Scrap Station as well, doing some baneling drops on the Terran player, which was not very common. It worked here. It would be common in ZVP later on. But, all the ceremony, grand shots of the crowd and all that good stuff. So, and then GSL would continue the very next, oh my God, is that Maru? Oh my God. We continue on like the very next month. So that is it. That is it for the video. I got so much more I could go into, but I really have to pick and choose. So thanks again for watching. I will definitely be diving further into some details, such as the fact that we were watching this in about 480p on a GOM-TV player. There's a subscription model to get higher quality. Talk about Tasos developing as well. If you heard in the final cast for just a hot second, Tasos' voice was very raw, and that has a lot to do with just how much casting he was doing, and anything else that pops up in my brain. And we haven't even really gotten started on the development of the non-Korean scene, which will eventually happen. But yeah, I gotta try and cut it down somehow, some way. So hope you guys enjoyed it. And as always, any suggestions or any corrections that you have, please just let me know. Any personal anecdotes as well. I love reading them. So yeah, just comment down below. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.